Donald Trump and Elon Musk and the rest of the billionaires who make up the Trump cabinet are attempting to privatize the post office, Social Security, the National Weather Service, federal lands, foreign policy grants, and much more. This is Robin Hood in reverse, but I want to get your sense of why this is happening. The big picture for U.S. capitalism, for this U.S. system, for the U.S. ruling class. What does it show about it? Anyway, let's get started.
Let's go back historically. The Republican Party has, for the last century or more, and the Democratic Party on this subject isn't all that different, but the Republican Party has, at least for the last century, been monomaniacally focused on doing what's good for big business. They have opposed every single program that you can mention. For example, Social Security had to be fought for in the depths of the Great Depression of the 1930s, when millions upon millions, the majority of the American families in this country were really broken down. If you remember John Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, you kind of had a visual understanding of what it was about. And the people demanded help from the government going through the collapse of capitalism that the 1930s represented. And there was such good organization by the two socialist parties, the Communist Party and the CIO, the labor movement, that they got Social Security, but they had to fight for it. And you know who opposed them? Capitalists, business, the employer class, at every step. The same is true of the minimum wage that they had to fight for in the 1930s to get it for the first time. And we haven't raised the minimum wage in this country, the federal one, since 2009. And you know why? Because of the opposition of employers. So let's remember, the Republican Party is the party of the employer class. And what they don't want is a government that is out of their control and reach for very obvious reasons. The government raises taxes, for example, to manage the postal system. It used to rely on taxes. Now it relies more on us buying stamps and all the rest of it, but they still get help from the federal government. The corporations don't want to pay tax for that. They want all the benefits of the public post office, but they don't want to pay for it. And the way to get that, cut the taxes, is to take it over themselves. And then they realize they can get a second benefit. Not only will they not have to pay taxes when the thing gets privatized, but they'll be the ones who can own and operate and invest in that private enterprise that replaces the post office. We know how that works because we've been destroying the post office for many years. It's called FedEx or UPS or a whole lot of other entities that have poached on this post office. And if you want to understand what I mean by poach, visit your neighborhood post office. You'll see a FedEx box right there. In other words, they've been required to fund their competitor. Wow, that's hostility to the government. Number two, corporations have always been worried about the government. The whole logic of the government is something private capitalism finds very troubling. On the one hand, the job of the government is to serve the people. Number one, that's your priority. The number one priority of the Social Security system is to give a guaranteed pension support to older people, among its other tasks. The number one goal of the post office is to manage the mail system of the country. It's not to be profitable. If the post office were a profit-making industry, most of rural America wouldn't have postal service. They would have cut it off. It's not profitable. Whoa. Capitalism is for profit. Everything capitalists do is for profit. If they make a profit, they succeed and they do better. If they don't make a profit, they die. So we understand, they're for profit. The government is not there to make a profit. Nobody ever cared whether the government makes a profit or not. Much of what the government does, it loses money because it doesn't charge as high a price as it could if it were a private enterprise. But you know what? Think a minute. That's a subsidy to all of us. We don't have to spend as much for a stamp if it's done by the public for the public. You give that to a private company, you're going to see postal rates that will blow your mind. Look, it's like Amtrak. It's like the rail system. Amtrak loses money. But that's a subsidy to the rest of us. We can buy rail tickets at a lower price than what we would have to pay if they were going to make a profit. Every corporation that sends its workers or its executives or its managers from one city to another on Amtrak is getting a break because the prices are lower than they would be. Capitalists are beneficiaries as well. And yet, despite that, they want privatization. And that's my third point. It is an ideological craziness. Let me put on my hat as a professional economist. For every efficiency you can find in the private sector, I will show you an equivalent one in the public sector. And for every inefficiency you can find in the public sector, I'll show you one in the private sector. The notion that one of them is efficient and the other one isn't is complete make-believe. It's ideological noise in favor of the profiteering ones. And now my last point, which I think I did on this show once before, but I'll say it again. In the 1960s, we had 2.5 million civilian employees of the federal government. Today, before Mr. Musk and Trump did their work, we had 2.5 million civilian employees. The same number. But the number of Americans is up by over 100 million since then. So we have the same number of workers, 2.5 million civilian employees of the federal government, servicing 100 more million people than they used to. You know what that's called? Efficiency is what that's called. 2.5 million are able to service many more. They've adjusted. They're the last ones you should go after if you really give a damn about efficiency. They don't. If they cared about the efficiency of public employees, they'd go after the 50 states, because together the 50 states have 5 million civilian employees, twice what the federal government does. And they'd really go after the local government level, cities and towns, because their civilian employees are 15 million. They're not doing anything to them because they can't, not because they care about efficiency. Please, let me appeal to you all. Don't be fooled. They want to privatize to make a buck. They want to privatize because they're ideologically lost in the make-believe story that private, that's what they are efficient, and public, that's what they're not, are inefficient. It is a crock, and nobody should be fooled by anything like this.
Richard, I want to talk about the Postal Service a little bit. You touched on it, that if it was purely privatized and driven only for profit, huge parts of the country would lose mail service because it's just not profitable. Their numbers are too low. These are in particular in rural areas or small town areas, areas that, historically voted or at least in recent times voted for Trump and the Republican Party. Now, the Postal Service, it's a very interesting phenomenon, what's happened in the last 2 decades, really in the last 15 years. When the capitalists, and especially the capitalists represented by some of the Republicans in Congress, like Darrell Issa, who had been the Republican congressperson from California, he was at that time, 2010 to 2012, the richest member of the House of Representatives. He came out and said, look, we have to reform the Postal Service. It's bankrupt. It's not making money. It's just a big debt. And so we want to privatize it. Now, what the public didn't know was that Issa and the other people in Congress who were pushing for this so-called reform in the name of efficiency put onto the Postal Service something that no private corporation ever has to be burdened with in terms of financial obligations. What was that? The Postal Service had to prepay its pension obligations for this very large postal workforce. It's at that time, about 600,000 employees, all the way up till 2070, meaning, in other words, 45 years from now, or what was then 55 years when they introduced it. So the Postal Service, which they said was running a $9.2 billion debt, was actually in debt because it was prepaying pension obligations going for a second or third generation of postal workers, people who aren't even yet hired. They were deliberately doing this to paint the picture that the Postal Service was a system in distress. Now, the postal unions, I worked with them quite closely in 2010, 2012, that period with the American Postal Workers Union and the National Association of Letter Carriers, the 2 main postal unions. They turned that around. They mobilized public opinion. People loved the post office. The unions were able, along with their community supporters, to expose it for what it was, basically a looting, plundering, and pillaging operation, so that the Postal Service, the vast value of the Postal Service, could be turned over to like FedEx or UPS or other privately held corporations. But here we are again. It's got new momentum, Richard. And again, this bogus claim that it's a bankrupt institution, it's not driven to maximize profit, which is the point you made in your first comments here. And nor should it be, because its main goal is to deliver the mail. But it's also this sort of made up story. And you see this with Musk about Social Security. He's calling Social Security the biggest Ponzi scheme in the world. There's a public relations effort underway by the billionaires to throw sand in people's eyes, to discredit these institutions as being somehow like a basket case economically, so they can then go to war against them and say, in order to save the service you love, we have to put it into private hands, meaning turn it over to billionaires. This is a real massive, well-tuned propaganda campaign by the billionaires, and I really think people should be alert to it. Go ahead.
My family is French. I go to France fairly often. In France, the post office is a treasure for the people of that country. It is public. It's not going private. Nobody would dare. You know what the post office does in France? It not only sells you stamps, it not only takes care of your packages, you can buy your insurance, all your insurances. You can do all your banking, savings deposits, checking accounts, loans, credit card. The bank does everything. One trip to the bank can take care of all of your financial, one trip to the post office can take care of everything. It's making use of the postal. The buildings are there. It's a much cheaper way to deliver, Fran. It's much more efficient than it is here. That's where we should be going. You know why we don't have that here? Because the private banks don't want the competition. They only talk about competition on the 4th of July when one of their fat executives gives a speech at the Rotary Club. The rest of the time, they squelch competition wherever they can. The big banks squeeze the little ones, and they all get together not to let the post office be the banker that would make all of that much, more efficient for us.